You know what's funny about the phrase, "you'll never amount to anything"? It has this weird power to echo in your skull for decades, bouncing around like a pinball made of pure spite. And right now, standing behind the velvet curtain at Harvard's Sanders Theater, adjusting my cap and gown while hundreds of distinguished faculty members shuffle into their seats, I can still hear Mrs. Peterson's voice from 23 years ago, delivering those exact words with the surgical precision of someone who genuinely believed she was performing a public service. The irony tastes better than I imagined it would. My hands are trembling slightly as I hold the speech I've been crafting for months. Not from nerves, but from something that feels like electricity mixed with vindication. The kind of trembling you get when you're about to settle a score that's been accumulating interest for most of your adult life. I can feel my heart beat in my temples, steady and purposeful, like a countdown timer finally reaching zero. The memory hits me with crystal clarity. 4th grade, Roosevelt Elementary. That suffocating classroom that always smelled like chalk dust and broken dreams. I was 8 years old, sitting in the front row, because that's where they put the difficult kids, close enough to monitor, far enough from the back to prevent any real rebellion. Mrs. Peterson had just finished grading our math tests, and mine came back with more red ink than a crime scene. I remember the weight of her disappointment pressing down on my shoulders as she leaned over my desk. Her breath smelled like coffee and judgment. She didn't whisper it. That's what still gets me. She said it loud enough for the entire class to hear, like she was making an announcement about the weather. "You'll never amount to anything if you can't even handle basic multiplication tables." The words hit me like a slap, but what came after was worse. The silence. 24 other 8-year-olds suddenly finding their shoelaces absolutely fascinating. Sarah Martinez, who I had a crush on, actually giggled. Actually fucking giggled. And Mrs. Peterson just stood there, arms crossed, like she just delivered some profound truth about the natural order of things. I felt my cheeks burn with shame, so intense it made my vision blur. That hot, prickly sensation that starts behind your ears and spreads across your face like spilled paint. I wanted to disappear into the floor, to melt into the industrial carpeting and never have to look at another human being again. Instead, I did what every humiliated kid does. I stared at my desk and pretended it didn't matter. But here's the thing about shame. It's like a seed. Plant it deep enough in fertile soil, and it grows into something else entirely. I can still see her face, round and pale, with these small, calculating eyes that seem to catalog every student's potential for failure. She had this way of tilting her head when she was about to deliver one of her life lessons, like she was channeling some higher educational wisdom. Looking back, I realized she was probably just tired, burned out, taking her own disappointments out on children who couldn't fight back. The memory doesn't stop there, though. It multiplies like a virus spreading through my consciousness. Mrs. Peterson was just the first in a parade of educators who seemed to view optimism as a character flaw and dreams as symptoms of delusion. Mr. Rodriguez in 7th grade, when I said I wanted to be a writer. Writing isn't a career, it's a hobby. You need to think practically. His mustache twitched when he was annoyed, and it was twitching like a caffeinated caterpillar as he crushed my 12-year-old ambitions with the casual efficiency of someone stepping on an ant. Ms. Chen in high school, when I applied for the advanced placement program, your test scores don't really support that level of academic rigor. Maybe consider the vocational track. She delivered this verdict while barely looking up from her paperwork, like my future was just another form to file. And then there was Principal Williams. Oh, fucking Principal Williams. Senior year when I was applying to colleges. He called me into his office with this grave expression, like he was about to deliver news of a death in the family. The office smelled like old leather and institutional resignation. "Son," he said, leaning back in his chair with this patronizing smile, "I've been in education for 30 years. I've seen thousands of kids come and go. And I have to tell you, based on your performance here, you're probably not college material. Have you considered trade school? There's no shame in working with your hands." The dismissal in his voice was so complete, so final, that for a moment I actually believed him. That's the insidious thing about authority figures. They don't just tell you what to do, they tell you who you are. And when enough of them agree, you start to think they might be right. I remember walking home that day feeling like I was carrying lead in my chest. Every step felt heavier than the last. The world looked different somehow, grayer, more limited. Like someone had quietly removed half the colors from the spectrum while I wasn't paying attention. My mom was in the kitchen when I got home, humming some song from the radio while she chopped vegetables for dinner. She took one look at my face and set down the knife. What happened? I told her about the meeting with Principal Williams, about his suggestion that I skip college and learn a trade instead. I expected her to be disappointed, maybe even relieved that someone in authority had finally stated what we all probably knew deep down, that I wasn't special, wasn't destined for anything beyond mediocrity. Instead, she got this look in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Not anger exactly. Something fiercer than that. Something that reminded me of a lioness protecting her cubs. Bullshit, she said, which was shocking because my mom never swore. Complete and utter bullshit. She dried her hands on her apron and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. You know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who reads everything he can get his hands on. Someone who asks questions that adults can't answer. Someone who writes stories in his notebook when he thinks no one is watching. Her voice was getting stronger, more certain. Those teachers, that principal, they're not prophets. They're just people with jobs, and some of them are really bad at their jobs. Don't let their lack of imagination become your ceiling. That conversation changed something fundamental in me. Not immediately. Change like that takes time to root. But a seed was planted that day, right next to the shame seed that Mrs. Peterson had buried 8 years earlier. And I decided, sitting in that kitchen with my mom's fierce love surrounding me like armor, that I was going to water the right one. Here's what those teachers never understood. Telling a stubborn kid they'll never amount to anything isn't a reality check. It's a challenge. It's throwing down a gauntlet and then walking away, confident that you've won a battle that's actually just begun. Every rejection letter I received in college became fuel. Every job interview that went poorly, every manuscript that came back with a polite not quite right for us, every moment of doubt that crept in during those dark 3 a.m. hours when the world feels impossible, it all went into the fire. I carried their words with me like a talisman, not as a burden, but as a reminder. A constant whispered dare echoing in the back of my mind. Prove them wrong. Prove them all wrong. And now, standing here in this historic theater, where some of the most brilliant minds in history have spoken, I can feel that 8-year-old boy's vindication coursing through my veins like electricity. The same boy who sat in that front row, burning with shame, is about to address one of the most prestigious academic institutions in the world. The irony isn't just delicious, it's fucking intoxicating. A stage manager appears beside me, clipboard in hand, giving me the 2-minute warning. My heart rate picks up, but it's not anxiety. It's anticipation. The kind of anticipation you feel when you're about to unwrap a gift you've been waiting your entire life to receive. Because tonight, I'm not just giving a speech. I'm delivering a thank you note that's been 23 years in the making. A thank you note with teeth. I can picture Mrs. Peterson right now, probably retired, maybe watching this live stream from her living room. I wonder if she'll remember that 4th grade moment. I wonder if she'll recognize the name when the dean introduces me. I wonder if she'll feel even a fraction of the shame she made me feel all those years ago. The thought makes me smile, and it's not a particularly nice smile. Places, everyone? The stage manager whispers. I adjust my cap one last time and check my speech. The words are perfect, carefully crafted, surgically precise, designed to cut deep while maintaining just enough humor to keep everyone laughing. A masterpiece of professional courtesy wrapped around a core of pure vengeance. As I step toward the stage, I can feel the ghosts of every teacher who ever doubted me following behind like a parade of regret. They're all about to learn what happens when you underestimate the power of spite combined with decades of determination. This is going to be fun. The planning for this moment didn't start with Harvard. It started with a Google search at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night in March, 6 months ago. I was sitting in my cramped studio apartment in Boston, eating leftover Chinese food straight from the container because washing dishes felt like admitting defeat, when I saw the notification pop up on my phone. Harvard was looking for a keynote speaker for their annual Education Innovation Summit. Something about transformative voices in modern learning and challenging traditional academic paradigms. The application deadline was in 2 weeks. I stared at that notification for probably 10 minutes, chopsticks suspended halfway to my mouth, while my brain did that thing where it runs through every possible scenario at light speed. The logical part of me, the part that had learned to expect disappointment, immediately started listing reasons why this was a terrible idea. I wasn't famous enough. I wasn't connected enough. I wasn't Harvard material, and deep down, maybe Principal Williams had been right all along. But then that other voice kicked in, the one that sounded suspiciously like my mom from that kitchen table conversation 20 years ago. The one that had been quietly building strength every time someone told me I couldn't do something. That voice whispered one word: fuck that. I spent the next 3 hours on my laptop crafting an application that was part professional pitch, part personal manifesto. I wrote about my unconventional path to success, from the kid who failed 4th grade math to the education technology entrepreneur who had just sold his company for enough money to buy a small country. I wrote about the teachers who had shaped me, though I was careful to frame it as inspiration rather than revenge fantasy. I wrote about the importance of believing in students who don't fit traditional molds. I made it sound noble and philosophical, like I was motivated by pure altruism rather than the burning desire to prove a point that had been smoldering in my chest for over 2 decades. The acceptance email came 6 weeks later. I was in a coffee shop in Cambridge when I saw it, and I literally choked on my latte. The woman at the next table asked if I was okay, and I wanted to tell her that I was more than okay. I was vindicated. Instead, I just nodded and tried to play it cool, while my heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. That's when the real planning began. Not the logistical planning, that was easy. Harvard has people for that. They sent me detailed schedules, transportation arrangements, catering preferences. They wanted to know about my dietary restrictions and preferred room temperature. They treated me like I was already important, which was a trip for someone who still got nervous ordering pizza over the phone. No, the real planning was psychological, strategic. It was figuring out how to craft a speech that would accomplish 2 seemingly impossible goals: inspire a room full of distinguished academics while simultaneously delivering a very personal "fuck you" to every teacher who had ever underestimated me. I started by researching everyone who would be in the audience. Harvard faculty, education administrators, policymakers, some students. I found their publications, their Twitter accounts, their professional histories. I needed to understand their language, their values, their pressure points. This wasn't just about getting revenge. It was about getting revenge in a way that would make them thank me for it. The breakthrough came when I realized I didn't need to be subtle. I could be direct about my motivations while framing them as a larger commentary on educational philosophy. I could tell my story, the real story, while making it sound like a case study in resilience and growth mindset. I could thank my doubters publicly while making it clear that their doubt had been the fuel for my success. The beauty of academic settings is that they love nothing more than a good narrative about overcoming adversity. I started writing drafts. The first one was pure venom. 20 minutes of detailed accounts of every slight, every dismissal, every moment of educational malpractice I'd endured. It felt good to write, cathartic even, but it wasn't strategic. It was just me screaming into the void, and screaming doesn't change anything. The second draft was too generous. I tried to take the high road, to forgive and forget, to focus on the positive impact those experiences had ultimately had on my life. But when I read it back, it sounded like I was grateful for being treated like shit. And that wasn't the message I wanted to send. The third draft was worse. Too academic, too detached, too boring. I sounded like every other keynote speaker who had ever stood behind a podium and delivered generic platitudes about the power of education. The fourth draft was getting closer, but it still wasn't right. I was trying too hard to be clever, to hide my anger behind sophisticated rhetoric. But anger wasn't something to hide, it was a tool to wield. The fifth draft was the one. I found the perfect balance between personal narrative and universal truth. I could tell my story while speaking to larger themes about the power of expectation, the danger of limiting beliefs, the responsibility that educators have to nurture potential rather than crush it. I could be vulnerable about my struggles while demonstrating strength through my success. And I could thank my doubters in a way that sounded gracious on the surface, but cut deep for anyone who bothered to read between the lines. I spent weeks refining it, testing different phrasings, timing the pauses, calibrating the emotional peaks and valleys. I practiced in front of my bathroom mirror, in my car during traffic jams, during long walks along the Charles River. I wanted every word to land exactly where I intended, but the speech was only part of the plan. The real genius was in the guest list. You see, Harvard doesn't just invite random people to their education summit. They invite people who matter in the field. People like Mrs. Peterson, who despite her soul-crushing teaching methods, had gone on to become a district administrator. People like Mr. Rodriguez, who was now heading up the state's curriculum committee. People like Ms. Chen, who had somehow parlayed her talent for discouraging students into a position as an education policy advisor. And Principal Williams, oh, beautiful, predictable Principal Williams, who was currently serving as the president of the National Association of Secondary School Principals. The summit organizers were so helpful when I mentioned that I wanted to invite some of the educators who had inspired me early in my career. They were delighted to facilitate these reunions, to bring together the people who had shaped my educational journey. They had no idea they were essentially planning my revenge fantasy for me. I crafted personal invitation letters to each of them, carefully worded, professionally formatted, dripping with fake humility. I told them how much their guidance had meant to me, how their early feedback had shaped my approach to learning and achievement. I mentioned that I would be acknowledging their influence in my speech, that I wanted to publicly thank the educators who had made the biggest impact on my life. The responses were exactly what I expected. Mrs. Peterson replied with effusive congratulations and barely concealed amazement that the struggling student she remembered had achieved such success. Mr. Rodriguez sent a brief but pleased acceptance, probably already imagining how he'd brag about his former student to his colleagues. Ms. Chen's response was more cautious. She probably didn't remember me specifically, but she wasn't about to pass up a prestigious Harvard event. And Principal Williams? His reply was a masterpiece of professional self-congratulation. He wrote about how rewarding it was to see former students succeed, how proud he was to have played a role in my development, how much he looked forward to hearing about my journey. The cognitive dissonance was breathtaking. Here was a man who had literally told me I wasn't college material, now claiming credit for my success. I printed out his email and taped it to my computer monitor as motivation while I fine-tuned my speech. During those weeks of preparation, I found myself thinking about the psychology of revenge. Most people think revenge is about making someone else suffer, but that's not quite right. Real revenge, the kind that actually satisfies, is about justice. It's about restoring balance to a universe that had been knocked off kilter by someone else's actions. Those teachers hadn't just hurt my feelings. They had attempted to limit my potential, to close doors that should have remained open, to convince me that my dreams were unrealistic. In a very real sense, they had tried to steal my future. And now I was taking it back. I imagined their faces when they realized what was happening. That moment of recognition when they understood that the student they had dismissed was now in a position to publicly evaluate their professional performance. The delicious irony of sitting in an audience, being lectured by someone they had once considered a failure. I spent hours crafting the perfect tone for each reference to them in my speech, gracious enough to maintain plausible deniability, specific enough that anyone who knew the real story would understand exactly what I was doing. I wanted to thank them for their doubt, for their low expectations, for their complete failure to recognize potential when it was sitting right in front of them. I wanted to thank them for teaching me that external validation was worthless, that the only opinion that really mattered was my own. I wanted to thank them for showing me that many people in positions of authority are mediocre at best, and that their judgments said more about their limitations than mine. As the date approached, I found myself sleeping better than I had in years. There's something deeply satisfying about having a plan, especially a plan that's been 23 years in the making. Every morning I woke up with this sense of anticipation, like Christmas morning stretched over several weeks. The closer I got to the event, the more real it became. This wasn't just a fantasy anymore. It was actually happening. I was actually going to stand on that stage in front of those people and deliver a speech that would reframe our entire shared history. I was going to transform myself from victim to victor, from the kid who couldn't handle basic multiplication to the successful entrepreneur who was educating the educators. A week before the summit, I had a moment of doubt. I was sitting in my apartment, holding the printed speech, wondering if I was about to make a terrible mistake. Was this petty? Was I about to humiliate myself in front of hundreds of distinguished professionals? Was I letting my ego drive me toward a cliff? Then I thought about that 8-year-old boy sitting in the front row, burning with shame while his classmates giggled at his humiliation. I thought about the 12-year-old who was told his dreams weren't practical. I thought about the 17-year-old who was told he wasn't college material. And I realized that this wasn't about ego at all. This was about justice. This was about standing up for every kid who had ever been told they weren't good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough to pursue their dreams. This was about proving that the people who are supposed to nurture potential sometimes crush it instead, and that sometimes the only way to heal that damage is to name it publicly. The doubt disappeared. I was ready. 3 days before the summit, I got a call from the event organizer. She wanted to go over the final details, make sure everything was perfect. She mentioned how excited everyone was to hear from me, how honored Harvard felt to have someone of my caliber speaking at their event. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Here was one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, practically genuflecting before someone who had been told he'd never amount to anything. I wanted to ask her to hold on for a second so I could call Mrs. Peterson and let her know that Harvard thought I was worthy of their respect. Instead, I just thanked her for the opportunity and confirmed that yes, I was ready to deliver a speech that would challenge conventional thinking about education and student potential. I wasn't lying. I was just operating on multiple levels simultaneously. The final preparation was almost meditative. I rehearsed the speech one last time, not because I needed to memorize it, I knew every word by heart, but because I wanted to feel the rhythm of it, the way each section built on the last, the way the emotional crescendos would land with maximum impact. I laid out my clothes for the next day. I charged my phone. I set 3 alarms. I wanted everything to be perfect. This was my moment, the culmination of more than 2 decades of proving people wrong. I was going to savor every second of it. That night, I dreamed about Mrs. Peterson. In the dream, she was still standing over my desk, still delivering her verdict about my worthlessness. But this time, instead of burning with shame, I just smiled. I stood up from my desk, walked to the front of the classroom, and began to speak. I told her about Harvard, about my company, about the hundreds of students I'd gone on to inspire and encourage. I told her about the teachers who had believed in me, who had seen potential where she had seen only problems. I told her that her words had indeed shaped my life, but not in the way she'd intended. In the dream, she tried to interrupt me, to explain that she'd only been trying to help, that she'd been realistic about my prospects. But I kept talking, my voice growing stronger, more confident. I thanked her for her doubt, for her limitations, for her complete failure to recognize what was possible. I thanked her for teaching me that sometimes the people who are supposed to guide us are the ones we need to learn to ignore. When I woke up, I was smiling. Today was the day. Today I was going to deliver a masterpiece of professional revenge, wrapped in the respectable packaging of educational philosophy. Today I was going to prove once and for all that their words had been wrong, their expectations had been too low, and their judgments had been fundamentally flawed. Today I was going to thank them for their doubt, and they were going to sit there and applaud me for it. The walk to the podium feels like floating. Every step is deliberate, measured, like I'm walking through honey made of pure anticipation. The applause washes over me, polite, academic, the kind of clapping that happens at universities where enthusiasm is considered gauche. But I can hear the individual hands, can almost identify who's clapping hardest, who's just going through the motions. My peripheral vision catches them immediately. There's Mrs. Peterson, 3rd row, center left, her hair silver now, but still pulled back in that same tight bun that used to make her look like a disapproving librarian. She's clapping with what appears to be genuine pride, probably still processing the cognitive dissonance of her former failure, standing at a Harvard podium. Mr. Rodriguez is 2 rows behind her, mustache now fully gray but still twitching, probably from excitement rather than annoyance for once. And there's Principal Williams sitting in the VIP section like he owns the place, beaming with the kind of proprietary pride that makes my teeth itch. I reach the podium and adjust the microphone. The sound echoes through Sanders Theater, that historic space where Ralph Waldo Emerson once spoke, where countless brilliant minds have shared their insights. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm about to use this hallowed ground to settle a score with elementary school teachers. I take a breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders like a familiar coat. Thank you, I begin, my voice carrying easily to the back of the theater. When I was 8 years old, my 4th grade teacher told me I'd never amount to anything if I couldn't handle basic multiplication tables. I pause, letting that sink in. I want to start by thanking her for those words because they changed my life in ways she never could have imagined. I can see Mrs. Peterson's face change. The pride is still there, but there's something else now. A flicker of recognition, maybe the first hint that this isn't going to be the generic inspiration speech she was expecting. Her hands have stopped clapping, and she's sitting very still, like a deer that's just heard a twig snap in the forest. I know what you're thinking. I continue, settling into the rhythm I've rehearsed 1,000 times. Here's another rags to riches story about overcoming adversity. Another tale of triumph over humble beginnings. And you'd be partially right, but this isn't a story about overcoming adversity. It's a story about adversity that was completely unnecessary. It's a story about the profound impact that low expectations can have on a young mind, and the remarkable things that can happen when those expectations are rejected. The audience is attentive now, leaning forward slightly. Academic audiences love a good deconstruction of educational theory. They have no idea they're about to witness a public execution disguised as a keynote address. You see, the teacher who told me I'd never amount to anything wasn't just delivering a casual observation. She was making a prediction about my future based on my performance in her class. She was taking the sacred trust that society places in educators, the responsibility to nurture and develop young minds, and using it as a weapon. My voice stays level, conversational, but I can feel the electricity building in the room. And she's here tonight. Mrs. Peterson's face has gone pale. I can see her trying to shrink into her seat, probably hoping she heard wrong, that this is some kind of cosmic coincidence. But I'm looking right at her now, and my smile is warm and professional and absolutely terrifying. Mrs. Peterson, would you mind standing up? I'd like the audience to meet one of the most influential people in my educational journey. The request sounds friendly, collegial, but it's not really a request. It's theater, and she's about to play her part whether she wants to or not. The spotlight operator, bless their efficient soul, finds her immediately, and suddenly she's bathed in white light while hundreds of eyes turn to look at her. She has no choice but to stand, her smile frozen somewhere between gracious and horrified. There she is, I say, my voice carrying the warmth of a favorite professor introducing a distinguished guest. Mrs. Peterson, everyone, 4th grade at Roosevelt Elementary. The woman who taught me that sometimes the people who are supposed to believe in us are the ones we need to learn to ignore. She's still standing, trapped in the spotlight, probably wondering how quickly she can get to her car after this is over. The audience applauds politely, not quite sure what they're applauding for, but following social convention. I let the moment breathe, savoring the exquisite awkwardness of it all. You can sit down now, Mrs. Peterson. Thank you for being here tonight. It means the world to me that you could witness this moment. The words are honey sweet, but anyone with half a brain can hear the razor blade hidden inside. She sits quickly, probably hoping to become invisible again, but I'm not done with her yet. Now, I want to be clear about something. I continue, turning back to the broader audience. Mrs. Peterson wasn't a monster. She wasn't cruel or sadistic. She was simply a teacher who had fallen into one of the most dangerous traps in education. The belief that her job was to sort children into categories rather than help them transcend those categories. I can feel the room shifting, the academic minds starting to engage with the theoretical framework I'm laying out. They don't realize it yet, but I'm building a case, constructing an argument with Mrs. Peterson as Exhibit A. Let me paint you a picture of what happened in that classroom. I was struggling with multiplication tables, not because I was incapable of learning them, but because I was bored out of my mind. I had already figured out that I could use addition to solve multiplication problems. I had intuited the concept of distributive property without knowing the formal name for it. I was actually demonstrating mathematical thinking at a level beyond rote memorization, but that's not what was being measured. I pause, letting that sink in. Several professors in the audience are nodding now, recognizing the pedagogical critique I'm building. What was being measured was my ability to perform a mechanical task quickly and accurately. And when I couldn't perform that task to Mrs. Peterson's standards, she made a judgment about my potential that went far beyond mathematics. She decided that my failure to memorize multiplication tables was indicative of some fundamental intellectual deficit that would prevent me from ever achieving anything meaningful in life. Mrs. Peterson is staring at her hands now, her face flushed with what I hope is shame. I'm not being cruel here, I'm being surgical. Every word is chosen carefully, designed to cut precisely where it will do the most damage. Now, I want to be fair to Mrs. Peterson. She was operating within a system that rewards conformity and punishes creativity. She was using assessment tools that measure compliance rather than intelligence. She was working in an environment that prioritizes standardization over individualization. In many ways, she was as much a victim of the system as I was. I'm giving her an out, showing the audience that I'm reasonable, that I understand the systemic issues at play, but I'm also making it clear that understanding context doesn't excuse impact. But here's where it gets interesting. Mrs. Peterson's words didn't just wound me, they motivated me. They created a kind of cognitive dissonance that drove me to prove her wrong. Every time I achieved something, every time I succeeded where she had predicted failure, I felt a surge of vindication that was almost addictive. In a very real sense, her doubt became my fuel. I can see Mr. Rodriguez now, his mustache twitching furiously. He's probably starting to suspect where this is going, probably wondering if his name is about to come up. It is. And Mrs. Peterson wasn't alone in her assessment. Mr. Rodriguez, my 7th grade English teacher, told me that writing wasn't a career, just a hobby. He suggested I think more practically about my future. I find him in the audience, and he's trying to look invisible too. Mr. Rodriguez, are you here tonight? The spotlight finds him, and he stands reluctantly, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. He manages a weak wave. Mr. Rodriguez, everyone. The man who taught me that passion without encouragement withers, but passion with opposition becomes unstoppable. The applause is more hesitant now. The audience is starting to understand that they're witnessing something more complex than a typical keynote address. Mr. Rodriguez crushed my writing aspirations with the casual efficiency of someone stepping on an ant. He didn't engage with my work or offer constructive feedback. He simply dismissed an entire field of human endeavor as impractical. And in doing so, he taught me one of the most valuable lessons of my life, that sometimes the people who are supposed to guide us are the ones we need to learn to ignore. Mr. Rodriguez sits down quickly, probably hoping to disappear into his seat, but I'm not done building my case. Then there was Ms. Chen, my high school guidance counselor, who told me my test scores didn't support academic rigor. She steered me away from advanced placement courses, effectively limiting my options before I'd even had a chance to explore them. I locate her in the audience, and she's already shaking her head slightly, probably hoping I won't call her out directly. Ms. Chen, thank you for joining us tonight. Your lesson was perhaps the most important of all. You taught me that gatekeepers often mistake their own limitations for universal truths. She doesn't stand when the spotlight finds her, just raises her hand slightly in acknowledgement. Smart. Less exposure that way. And finally, we have Principal Williams, who told me I probably wasn't college material and suggested I consider trade school instead. I paused, letting that sink in. Principal Williams, who is currently serving as president of the National Association of Secondary School Principals, telling a student that higher education wasn't in his future. Principal Williams stands with more confidence than the others, probably because he's higher up in the educational hierarchy and thinks he can weather this storm with his professional dignity intact. He's wrong. Principal Williams, everyone. The man who taught me that sometimes the people in charge are the least qualified to make decisions about potential. The applause is barely polite now. The audience is starting to understand that they're witnessing something between a keynote and a public trial. Now, I want to be clear about something. I continue, my voice growing stronger. Each of these educators had an opportunity to plant seeds of possibility in young minds. They had the chance to say, "You're struggling with this now, but let's figure out how to help you succeed." They could have said, "Your interests are valid and we'll help you explore them." They could have said, "Your potential is unlimited and we'll help you discover it." I paused, letting the weight of missed opportunities settle over the room. Instead, they chose limitation. They chose to close doors rather than open them. They chose to discourage rather than inspire. And in doing so, they taught me the most valuable lesson of all, that the only person who gets to decide your worth is you. The room is completely silent now. I can hear the heating system cycling on, the distant sound of traffic outside, the rustle of fabric as people shift uncomfortably in their seats. This is the moment I've been building toward, the climactic revelation that will transform this from a personal story into a universal truth. I want to thank each of these educators for their doubt. Not because their doubt was helpful, it wasn't. Not because their low expectations inspired me, they didn't. I want to thank them because their failure to recognize potential taught me to recognize it in others. I'm looking directly at Mrs. Peterson now, and she's staring back with a mixture of horror and fascination, like she's watching a car accident in slow motion. You see, when I started my education technology company, I didn't hire based on traditional metrics. I didn't care about GPAs or standardized test scores or letters of recommendation from prestigious institutions. I hired based on curiosity, creativity, and resilience. I hired the kids who had been told they weren't good enough, who had been underestimated, who had been written off by people who should have known better. I paused, letting that sink in. And you know what? Those employees, the ones who had been dismissed and discouraged, they were the ones who came up with our most innovative solutions. They were the ones who worked hardest, who pushed boundaries, who refused to accept conventional wisdom about what was possible. The audience is starting to shift again, some of them nodding in recognition of the larger point I'm making. But my original targets are still squirming in their seats, probably wishing they had never accepted my invitation. My company just sold for $847 million. That's what happens when you hire people based on potential rather than performance, when you encourage risk-taking rather than conformity, when you believe in possibility rather than limitation. I let that number hang in the air for a moment. $847 million, created by people who were told they'd never amount to anything. Mrs. Peterson looks like she's about to be sick. The woman who once told me I'd never amount to anything is now listening to me describe creating nearly $1 billion in value. The irony is so perfect, it's almost artistic. Now, I could stand here and tell you that I forgive these educators for their mistakes. I could take the high road and say that their doubt ultimately made me stronger. But that would be dishonest, and it would miss the point entirely. My voice is getting sharper now, more focused. The point isn't about forgiveness. The point is about responsibility. I'm no longer speaking to the general audience. I'm speaking directly to the 4 people who are probably wishing they had never been born. Every educator in this room has the power to change lives. You have the power to plant seeds of possibility or limitations. You have the power to open doors or close them. You have the power to inspire or discourage. And with that power comes profound responsibility. The silence is deafening now. I can see people in the audience exchanging glances, probably wondering if they should intervene, if this has gone too far. But I'm not done. I'm nowhere near done. I want every educator in this room to remember something. When you tell a child they're not good enough, you're not just delivering feedback. You're potentially altering the trajectory of their entire life. When you discourage a student's dreams, you're not being realistic. You're being lazy. When you make assumptions about someone's potential based on their current performance, you're not being practical, you're being dangerous. I can feel the energy in the room shifting, the academic politeness giving way to something raw or more honest. Some people are nodding in agreement, others are looking uncomfortable, a few are taking notes frantically. But everyone is listening. Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Rodriguez, Ms. Chen, Principal Williams, you all had the same opportunity. You could have been the teachers who believed in a struggling student, who saw potential where others saw problems, who helped a young mind discover its own capabilities. Instead, you chose to be cautionary tales. The words hit like physical blows. I can see Mrs. Peterson's shoulders shaking slightly. Mr. Rodriguez is staring at the floor. Ms. Chen has her arms crossed defensively. Principal Williams is trying to maintain his professional composure, but there's sweat beading on his forehead. And here's the beautiful irony of it all. I continue, my voice carrying easily to every corner of the theater. Your doubt didn't limit me, it liberated me. When you told me I'd never amount to anything, you freed me from the need to seek your approval. When you dismissed my dreams, you taught me to trust my own judgment. When you tried to lower my expectations, you showed me that your expectations were irrelevant. I paused, savoring the moment. This is what 23 years of waiting feels like when it finally pays off. This is what vindication tastes like when it's served ice cold in front of hundreds of witnesses. In fact, I would argue that your doubt was the greatest gift you could have given me. Not because it motivated me, that gives you too much credit, but because it taught me to be completely independent of external validation. It taught me that the only opinion that matters is my own. It taught me that people in positions of authority are often wrong, and that their being wrong doesn't make me wrong. The audience is completely transfixed now. This isn't just a keynote address anymore. It's a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as educational philosophy, and everyone knows it. So I want to thank you sincerely for your doubt. I want to thank you for your low expectations. I want to thank you for your complete failure to recognize potential when it was sitting right in front of you. Because in failing me, you taught me to succeed on my own terms. I looked directly at each of them in turn, my smile warm and professional and absolutely devastating. Mrs. Peterson, your words echo in my mind every time I achieve something you said was impossible. Mr. Rodriguez, I think about you every time I cash a royalty check from one of my published books. Ms. Chen, I remember your guidance every time I speak at a conference or receive an award. And Principal Williams, I think of your career counseling every time I walk through a university campus, where I'm being honored as a distinguished alumnus. The silence is so complete it's almost physical. You could hear a pin drop in Sanders Theater right now. Every eye is on me, waiting to see where this goes next. But most importantly, I want to thank you for teaching me what kind of educator I never want to be. When I started my company, I made a promise to myself. I would never crush someone's dreams just because I couldn't imagine them coming true. I would never mistake my own limitations for universal truths. I would never use my position of authority to discourage rather than inspire. I paused, letting that settle over the room like a blanket. And that's why I'm here tonight. Not to humiliate you, though I'll admit there's a certain satisfaction in watching you squirm, but to challenge everyone in this room to examine their own assumptions about potential. to question whether they're opening doors or closing them, to ask themselves whether they're planting seeds of possibility or limitation. The energy in the room is electric now. I can feel the audience processing what they've just witnessed, trying to figure out how to respond to this unprecedented blend of personal vindication and professional challenge. Because here's what I learned from my experience with these 4 educators. Potential is not a fixed quantity. It's not something that can be measured by standardized tests or predicted by current performance. Potential is dynamic, contextual, and often invisible to people who lack the imagination to see it. I'm building to the climax now, the moment where personal revenge transforms into universal truth. Every student who walks into your classroom has unlimited potential. Every struggling learner has the capacity for greatness. Every child who doesn't fit your mold has the ability to create their own mold. Your job is not to sort them into categories. It's to help them transcend categories. Your job is not to predict their future. It's to help them create their future. The applause starts slowly, hesitantly, but it builds quickly. People are standing now, clapping with the kind of enthusiasm that comes from witnessing something truly extraordinary. But I'm not done yet. I have one more arrow in my quiver. So to every educator in this room, I want to leave you with this thought. You have the power to be someone's Mrs. Peterson, or you can be someone's inspiration. You can be the teacher who tells a child they'll never amount to anything, or you can be the teacher who helps them discover what they're capable of becoming. I look one more time at my original targets, now sitting in various states of professional devastation. Choose wisely, because 23 years from now, one of your students might be standing at this podium telling their story, and you get to decide whether you're the hero or the villain in that story. The standing ovation is thunderous now, lasting several minutes. People are cheering, applauding, some are even crying. But I'm not looking at the general audience anymore. I'm looking at 4 specific people who are clapping politely but dying inside. Mrs. Peterson is applauding with tears in her eyes, whether from shame or recognition, I can't tell. Mr. Rodriguez is nodding slowly, his mustache finally still. Ms. Chen is clapping mechanically, her face a mask of professional composure. And Principal Williams is standing with the rest of the audience, but his smile looks like it's been carved from stone. As the applause finally dies down, I lean into the microphone one more time. Thank you, Harvard, for this incredible honor. Thank you to the educators who believed in me along the way. And thank you to the educators who didn't. You taught me the most important lesson of all. I stepped back from the podium, my heart hammering with a mixture of adrenaline and satisfaction. I've done it. I've actually done it. 23 years of waiting, planning, and working toward this moment, and it exceeded every expectation I had. As I walk off the stage, I can feel their eyes on me. Not the general audience, but the 4 people who never saw this coming. The 4 people who thought they could limit my potential and then show up to claim credit for my success. The irony is perfect. They came here expecting to bask in reflected glory, to tell people about their former student, who had made it big. Instead, they got a master class in how their own failures had shaped someone else's success. I can't stop smiling. This is what vindication feels like. This is what justice tastes like. This is what happens when you tell a stubborn kid they'll never amount to anything and then sit back and wait for them to prove you wrong. The best part? They're going to spend the rest of their lives remembering this moment. Every time they doubt a student, every time they consider discouraging a dream, every time they think about limiting someone's potential, they're going to remember standing in that spotlight while I thank them for their doubt. That's a gift that keeps on giving. As I reach the wings, I turn back one more time to look at the audience. They're still buzzing with energy, still processing what they've just witnessed. Some are taking notes, others are having animated conversations. A few are pulling out their phones to share what they've just experienced. But my eyes find the 4 people who matter most. Mrs. Peterson is still in her seat, staring at the now empty podium. Mr. Rodriguez is gathering his things slowly, like he's not sure what to do next. Ms. Chen is talking to someone next to her, probably trying to process what just happened. And Principal Williams is standing frozen in place, like he's been turned to stone. They're all thinking the same thing. How did we get here? How did the kid we wrote off end up in a position to write us off? How did our professional judgment turn out to be so catastrophically wrong? I could almost feel sorry for them. Almost. But then I remember that 8-year-old boy, burning with shame in the front row. I remember the 12-year-old who was told his dreams weren't practical. I remember the 17-year-old who was told he wasn't college material. Those memories kill any sympathy I might have felt. This isn't about cruelty. It's about consequences. It's about the fact that words have power, and people who wield that power carelessly should face the results of their choices. It's about the fact that some debts take 23 years to collect, but they do eventually come due. As I walk toward the reception area, I can hear the conversation starting behind me. People are talking about what they just witnessed, trying to categorize it, trying to figure out how to respond. Some are calling it brilliant, others are calling it brutal, a few are calling it both. But I know what it really was. It was justice. It was the settling of a score that had been accumulating interest for most of my adult life. It was the moment when the underdog finally got to address the people who had tried to keep him down. And it was perfect. The revenge was complete. The debt was paid. The circle was closed. Now I just had to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. The reception afterward is a masterpiece of academic awkwardness. I'm standing near the wine table, holding a glass of something expensive that I'm not really drinking, watching the social dynamics play out like a nature documentary. The general audience is treating me like I've just delivered the Gettysburg Address. Professors are approaching with that eager, slightly breathless way academics get when they have witnessed something they think might be historically significant. They want to shake my hand, get my card, ask follow-up questions about my pedagogical philosophy. They're treating me like a conquering hero, which is exactly what I wanted. But the real entertainment is watching my original targets navigate the social minefield. Mrs. Peterson is standing near the cheese table, looking like she's been hollowed out from the inside. Every few minutes, someone approaches her to make polite conversation, and I can see her trying to figure out how to explain her connection to tonight's speaker. Does she admit to being the teacher who told me I'd never amount to anything? Does she try to claim credit for motivating me? Does she pretend she doesn't remember the incident at all? Each conversation looks like it's physically painful for her. Mr. Rodriguez has positioned himself near the exit, clearly planning his escape route. His mustache is twitching nonstop now, and he keeps checking his phone like he's expecting an urgent call that will require him to leave immediately. A few people have approached him, but he's keeping the conversations brief, probably afraid that someone will ask him to elaborate on his role in my educational journey. Ms. Chen is doing better. She's managed to insert herself into a group discussion about educational assessment, probably trying to reframe herself as someone who understands the limitations of traditional evaluation methods. It's actually impressive how quickly she's adapted to the new narrative. If I didn't know better, I'd think she was about to give her own keynote about the importance of recognizing non-traditional forms of intelligence. But Principal Williams is the most fascinating to watch. He's holding court near the reception desk, and I can hear fragments of his conversation from across the room. He's actually trying to take credit for my success, spinning some narrative about how his tough love approach helped prepare me for the real world. The cognitive dissonance is breathtaking. Here's a man who literally told me I wasn't college material, now claiming that his harsh assessment was actually a strategic intervention designed to motivate me to prove him wrong. I'm debating whether to approach him directly when a woman taps me on the shoulder. She's maybe 50, with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair, wearing the kind of practical blazer that screams public school teacher. "Excuse me," she says, "I'm Sarah Martinez. I teach 5th grade at Lincoln Elementary in Cambridge." The name hits me like a physical blow. Sarah Martinez, the girl who giggled when Mrs. Peterson humiliated me in 4th grade. The girl I had a crush on, who witnessed my shame and found it amusing. Now she's a teacher herself, and she's standing in front of me with what looks like genuine admiration. "I just wanted to say," she continues, "that your speech tonight was exactly what I needed to hear. I've been teaching for 15 years, and I'm ashamed to admit that I've probably been more like your Mrs. Peterson than I'd like to acknowledge. Watching you up there, listening to you describe how those words affected you, it was like looking in a mirror I didn't want to see. The irony is so perfect it's almost surreal. The girl who laughed at my humiliation has become a teacher who's just realized she might be perpetuating the same cycle. There's something beautifully circular about this moment. Like the universe is offering me a chance to complete a different kind of circle. "I remember you," I say, and her face goes pale. "4th grade. You were there when Mrs. Peterson told me I'd never amount to anything. You laughed." She closes her eyes for a moment, and when she opens them, there are tears there. I remember that day. I've thought about it more times than I can count. I was 8 years old, and I thought I was just, I don't know, following the social cues. But I've always felt sick about it. And when I became a teacher myself, I swore I would never let something like that happen in my classroom. There's something in her voice that stops me from going for the kill. A genuine remorse that's different from the defensive positioning I'm seeing from the others. She's not trying to justify her actions or reframe the narrative. She's just acknowledging the harm and taking responsibility for it. You know what? I say, and I can feel my anger softening into something more complex. You were 8. We were all 8. The adults in the room were the ones who were supposed to know better. She nods, but she's still crying. I watch my students every day, and I see kids who remind me of you. Kids who are struggling, who don't fit the mold, who are brilliant in ways that don't show up on tests. And I try to be the teacher I wish you'd had. I try to be the teacher I wish I'd had. This is what I didn't expect. I planned for defensiveness, for justification, for cognitive dissonance. I didn't plan for genuine accountability and growth. I didn't plan for the possibility that my story might actually change someone's approach to education. That's all any of us can do, I say, and I realize I mean it. Learn from the mistakes, ours and other people's, and do better. She thanks me again and walks away, but the interaction has shifted something in my chest. The burning satisfaction I felt on stage is starting to transform into something more complex. The revenge was perfect, surgical, devastating. But this conversation with Sarah reminds me that the real point was never just about settling scores. It was about making sure this doesn't happen to other kids. I look around the room again, and I see it differently now. Yes, Mrs. Peterson looks devastated, and there's a part of me that finds that satisfying. But there's also a part of me that wonders if she's learning something from this humiliation, if she's thinking about all the other kids she might have crushed along the way. Mr. Rodriguez is still lurking near the exit, but now I notice he's talking to a young man who looks like he might be a student teacher. I can't hear what they're saying, but I can see Mr. Rodriguez gesturing emphatically, and the young man is nodding seriously. Maybe he's sharing his own cautionary tale, warning the next generation about the dangers of discouraging student dreams. Ms. Chen has moved on from her assessment discussion and is now talking to someone from the Harvard School of Education. They're both taking notes, and I catch fragments about recognizing multiple intelligences and the limitations of standardized metrics. Maybe she's actually internalized some of what I said up there. And Principal Williams, even he has stopped holding court and is now standing quietly staring at his drink. For the first time since I've known him, he looks uncertain, like he's questioning something fundamental about his approach to leadership. The truth is, I got exactly what I wanted tonight. I stood on that stage and delivered a perfect revenge fantasy. I made them squirm, made them confront their failures, made them face the consequences of their words. I proved definitively and publicly that their assessments of my potential were not just wrong, but spectacularly wrong. I took the shame they had made me feel and reflected it back at them, amplified and focused like sunlight through a magnifying glass. But now in the aftermath, I'm discovering something I didn't expect. Revenge is a dish best served cold, but it doesn't stay cold. Once you've eaten it, once you've tasted that perfect moment of vindication, it starts to warm in your stomach. And what you're left with isn't the burning satisfaction you expected. It's something more complex, more human. I'm not sorry for what I did tonight. Those 4 people needed to hear what I had to say, and they needed to hear it publicly. They needed to understand that their words had consequences, that their assumptions about potential could be devastatingly wrong. They needed to be reminded that the children they dismiss might grow up to be the adults who evaluate their professional legacy. But I'm also not the same person who walked onto that stage 45 minutes ago. That person was carrying 23 years of anger, 23 years of hurt, 23 years of needing to prove something to people who had never deserved that power over him. This person, the one walking out of Sanders Theater with his revenge complete, is lighter somehow. Not because the anger's gone, but because it's been transformed into something more useful. I think about that 8-year-old boy again, sitting in the front row, burning with shame. I want to tell him that it's going to be okay, that those words will hurt for a long time, but they won't define him. I want to tell him that he's going to use that hurt to build something beautiful, something that helps other kids avoid the same pain. But mostly I want to tell him that someday he's going to stand in front of those teachers and thank them for their doubt. And it's going to feel exactly as good as he imagined it would. The reception is winding down now, and people are starting to leave. I watch Mrs. Peterson walk toward the exit, her shoulders slightly hunched, looking older than she did when she arrived. Part of me wants to approach her, to have a private conversation, to maybe offer some kind of closure that's less public and more personal, but I don't. Some circles are meant to be closed exactly once, and this one is complete. She'll go home tonight and think about what happened here, She'll probably lose sleep over it. She'll question other interactions she's had with students, wonder how many other kids she might have discouraged along the way. And maybe she'll do better tomorrow. That's not my responsibility anymore. My responsibility was to tell my story, to bear witness to the impact of low expectations, to challenge the educators in that room to examine their own assumptions about potential. I've done that. The rest is up to them. As I walk toward the parking garage, I pull out my phone and call my mom. She answers on the second ring. How did it go? She asks, and I can hear the smile in her voice. It was perfect, I say, and I mean it. It was absolutely perfect. I'm proud of you, she says, not because you got revenge, but because you turned your pain into something that might help other kids. That's my mom, cutting straight to the heart of it, as always. She's right. The revenge was satisfying, but the real victory was using my platform to challenge the system that created those teachers in the first place. The real victory was standing up for every kid who's ever been told they're not good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough to pursue their dreams. I drive home through the quiet Cambridge streets, feeling something I haven't felt in years. Complete. The debt is paid. The circle is closed. The boy who was told he'd never amount to anything has just thanked his doubters at Harvard University. And the universe feels balanced again. Tomorrow, I'll start thinking about what comes next. Tomorrow, I'll start planning the foundation I want to create. The scholarship program for underestimated students, the teacher training workshops about recognizing potential. Tomorrow, I'll start figuring out how to turn this moment of personal vindication into something that serves a larger purpose. But tonight, I'm just going to sit with this feeling. The feeling of a promise kept, a debt paid, a wrong made right. The feeling of looking into the face of someone who tried to limit your potential and proving once and for all that their limitations were never about you. Tonight, I'm going to remember that sometimes the best revenge is a life well lived. And sometimes the best way to live that life is to make sure the people who tried to limit you have to watch you transcend every boundary they tried to set. The 8-year-old boy in the front row can finally rest. His shame has been transformed into strength, his hurt into healing, his anger into action. And the teachers who tried to limit him have learned that some students don't just overcome low expectations. They come back to personally deliver the lesson their teachers should have learned in the first place. You'll never amount to anything? Watch me.